Yeah, so we've been discussing the mitzvah of Urevu, and last week I think we got into some digressions about the laws of tznius generally. Uh, Let me just mention one thing. There's an interesting machlokas in the Gemara. I think I may have mentioned the machlokas. If a non-Jewish man has children from a non-Jewish woman, and they're his children, and he then converts, does he fulfill the mitzvah of procreation through the children that were born when he was a non-Jew? Now, it's very important that you make a difference in two situations. If a non-Jewish man had children from a Jewish woman and he then converted, it's a davar pashut. He is not Makayim Pru'ervu, even though the kids are Jewish, because his non-Jewish parentage does not give him paternity to those children. That's absolutely pashut. That is not a machlokus. Again, let me repeat this. If a non-Jewish man has children from a Jewish woman, and the children are Jewish, he then converts. He is not Makayim Pru'ervu, because halachically, again, emotionally, there's another situation, but halachically, they're not his kids. That is not the subject matter of the Gemara. The subject matter of the Gemara is a non-Jewish man has children from a non-Jewish woman, and the kids are not Jewish, but they are his kids halachically. So the question is, if he converts, does he have a mitzvah? Has he fulfilled his mitzvah, or must he have children after his conversion? So one opinion in the Gemara actually says he is mekayem the mitzvah with the non-Jewish children that he had. The other opinion says that doesn't work because of the very fundamental principle, ger sheniskayer, when a non-Jew converts to Judaism, kikatan shenolad dami, he is like a newly created entity. And therefore, whatever he did in the past kind of doesn't carry over. And that's indeed the halacha. The halacha is, in that particular situation, that if a non-Jewish man had children with a non-Jewish woman, and then he converted, and even if she converted, he is not Makayim Pru'ervu. So this would be very relevant. The way that this comes up a lot is, well, not a lot, but the most common situation is when you have a non-Jewish couple with children who want to convert to Judaism. So you can actually have sometimes, 6 people converting, father, mother, and all of the kids will be converted as minors. So halachically, the mitzvah of Pru'ervu has not been fulfilled, and therefore there will still be an obligation on the man to try to have another son and another daughter, because even though he did bring with his wife 6 children, let's say, into the world, but because of the principle of ger shenitzgayer kekatan shenolad dami, halacha, again, I don't take this to an extreme. I'm not referring to an emotional bond, etc. But halachically, they're not his children. Halachically, don't be scared off by that. Now, we did discuss last week that legabe yichud and chibuk v'nishuk, hugging and kissing, since they are biologically the children, there is no problem. So if a family converts, mom is allowed to hug and kiss the boys, and dad is allowed to hug and kiss the girls, and there's no problem of yichud, because that's really a biological reality. Since biologically they're connected, then in a normal, healthy, non-pathological situation, there will not be improper sexual thoughts. But in terms of halacha, they are technically not related. It's hard to grasp this, but that would mean, for example, that if a family converts, the children do not have any inheritance rights in their parents' estate. And that's why they would have to make a will or something like that, because the laws of inheritance will not apply a non-Jewish man and a non-Jewish a child, they both convert, there is no inheritance between them. I had even mentioned to you the very extreme idea that that on a Torah level, there is not even incest between them on a Torah level. Meaning, once again, I think I mentioned this, meaning on a Torah level, if a mother and a son convert, they could get married. If a father and a daughter convert, they could get married. If a brother and a sister convert, on a Torah level, they could get married. As you would probably guess, the Rabbanan prohibited it because of Marit Ayin. I mean, it looks pretty bad, right? It looks like incest, and of course, biologically it's incest, but based on the concept of Gershon Itgayer, Kekatan Shenola Dami, halachically they're not related. Now, this creates some interesting side questions, which I don't want to address every single aspect of it. Is this a good way to get out of taxes or get out of debt? I mean, non-Jewish guy borrows money and then decides to convert to Judaism. Like, does that erase the debt because he's a newly created person? Um, the bottom line is that it does not. The bottom line is that Gershon Itgayer affects relationship. It affects korva. It does not affect pre-existing obligations, whether they be financial obligations or even, God forbid, a death penalty. If for whatever reason the non-Jew was chayev misa under the 7 Noahide laws, he does not get out of the death sentence by doing a conversion. So it is a bit of a limited principle, but we do apply it to Urevu, the halacha, and therefore he is not makayim the mitzvah with the children that he had as a non-Jew, and therefore he is still obligated in the mitzvah of Urevu. Yeah.
Would you, rather than using the expression from the Torah point of view, would you say perhaps you could use the expression from a technical point of view? Because I find it very difficult to think that that you can say midoraisa, a father and his daughter would be married.
Well, okay. Well, again, it happens to be true that Doraisa they could, but if you want to use the word from a technical standpoint, that's okay with me. If that's a more comfortable expression for you. Again, I mean, these are difficulties, but again, the halacha actually says. In fact, it's very interesting. Let me point out that the Gemara derives the laws of conversion from what the Jewish people did before they got the Torah. In other words, in a sense, Matan Torah is viewed as a mass conversion ceremony. We went to the mikveh, the men circumcised. When we said Naaseh v'nishma, we accepted the commandments. So indeed, the Gemara in Yevamos actually says that the laws of conversion are based on what the Jewish people did at Matan Torah. Matan Torah was a conversion of the Jewish people. Based on this, the Meshech Chochmah actually says, from a technical standpoint, that first generation of Jews who converted at Sinai did not have incestuous restrictions, technically, precisely because they underwent a mass conversion process. That's what the Meshech Chochmah, Rav Meir Simcha Cohen, says. Interestingly enough, he does not quote a much earlier source, the Maharal of Prague, who deals with this issue. And Maharal Prague says exactly the opposite. Maharal Prague says the following. He says that although conversion, a normal conversion, erases familial bonds, the conversion at Sinai was an exception to that rule. And his argument was, interestingly enough, that the rule that conversion erases familial bonds is only true when it's a voluntary conversion. Now, in truth, the only conversion we have today is voluntary conversion. But at Sinai, Hashem held the mountain over our heads and kind of forced us into it. So Maharal actually says an involuntary conversion, of which there was only one instance, does not trigger the rule of severing familial bonds. And it's interesting that he proves it from a reductio ad absurdum. He says, because if you're going to say it erases familial bonds, you would come to the crazy conclusion that incestuous relationships were permitted for that first generation. But what's strange is that's exactly what Meshech Chachma says is the case. So there's a saying that one person's reductio ad absurdum is another person's ein hachinami. Ein hachinami means, yeah, that's the way it is, meaning what the Maharal considered to be inconceivable is exactly what Rev Meir Simcha HaKohen says was the case. Yeah.
It says was that before Matan Torah or after that they were
Yeah, so that's one of the rayas. It says they were crying because of iskei arayos, implying that there were forbidden relationships. The Meshech Chachma would say that that was not crying because of their immediate situation, but for the next generation. Yeah.
We're all familiar with the distinction between the Raja prohibition and rabbinical prohibition.
Yeah.
But in this case, where we're dealing with a heter, with a permission, is that permission derisa or rabbinical?
Well, the permission would be doraisa. I mean, well, in the negative sense that the Torah does not prohibit it. I mean, not that the Torah commands it, but when we say something is mutter doraisa, that just means it is not prohibited by the Torah. The prohibition was added by the Chachamim, by the sages. Okay, now the doraisa doesn't always mean it's a mitzvah doraisa. It just means that there's no prohibition on a doraita level.
Just
Yeah.
to follow the question, don't we believe that there are a few acts which are abominable, although they're not forbidden by the Torah? For example, cannibalism. I mean, as far as I know, it's never mentioned, but it's
Yeah.
it's certainly not something that
We would not encourage it. Yeah.
or even fail to be discussed in the Bible.
Yeah.
Right.
All right. So you're asking. All right. So actually, you're raising a very interesting thing. Let me just digress for a moment to address that. In philosophy of jurisprudence, there's a whole school of thought that's based on what is called natural law. Natural law basically means that the idea that certain things are so ingrained in the normal moral conscience of a human being that it becomes a binding principle of behavior, even in the absence of a legislature or even a divine command, because it's something you should have known, you should have figured it out. There should be a natural revulsion. Now, I think, as far as I know, I didn't make a study of this. Natural law must presuppose, I believe, a divine source in some way, because the idea that which is in my conscience is somehow binding, I'm not sure if it totally makes sense without some supernatural external force. But be it as it may, it happens to be the case that natural law proponents are primarily within either Christian and sometimes Jewish communities. Now, the interesting question is, does Judaism believe in natural law? To put it another way, does Judaism believe that certain behaviors are immoral or unethical, even if the Torah or the Halacha does not prescribe them? In other words, is there an antecedent ethic that goes beyond Halacha? Or is Halacha the source, the exclusive source of our ethical judgments? So Rav Aaron Lichtenstein, Zechron Livracha, many of you might have known him, wrote a very influential article, like maybe 50 years ago, called precisely this: does Judaism recognize an ethic outside of the halacha? And this is a very important issue because this is how we think about Amalek and all sorts of things that seem to be unethical. There are those who say, if God is the source of ethics and morality, it's impossible for God to do something unethical, because if God does it, it's ethical, because that's the very definition. And yet we find in last week's Parsha that when Avram Avinu argues with Hashem about Sodom, Avram Avinu is appealing, apparently, to a pre-existing ethical standard, because he says to God, how can you kill the righteous and the Rasha? Will the judge of the world not do justice? Now, If the definition of justice is whatever the will of God happens to be, then it's impossible to accuse God of injustice, because because God is the definition of justice. So you see from the pasuk itself that there is some type of pre-existing standard to which, in theory, even the Almighty is supposed to be subject to. Now, there's a fascinating passage from one of the Gaonim, Rabbi Nissim Gaon. Those of you who learn Gemara, you may see in Maseches Brachos for a few pages, there's a fragmentary commentary on the side of the page, Rabbi Nissim Gaon. Fragmentary, but very interesting, even for the few pages. And he makes the following observation. If you look in the book of Yechezkel, in Sefer Yechezkel, the Jewish people, this is before the Churban Bayis Rishon, the Jewish people are being discussed as if they are another Sodom and Amorah. Like, you guys are as bad as Sodom and Amorah, and therefore you deserve to be destroyed. And the pasuk describes what is the sin of Sodom and Amorah. So it doesn't say sodomy, it doesn't say homosexuality, it doesn't say any of that. It actually says it was the cruelty to the poor, the lack of compassion, the lack of care, not thinking about other people. Now, again, Chazal may say there were other sins there, but indeed, that is the Avera that the Navi points out. So, Rabbi Nissim Gaon makes the following observation. The Sodomites were Goyim, they were not Jews. Their only obligation, halachically, so to speak, were the 7 commandments of Noach. If you go through the 7 commandments of Noach, there is no mitzvah to give tzedakah. Giving tzedakah, helping the poor, is not enumerated as the Sheva Mitzvahs B'nai Noach. So how could Sodom be punished if there was no divine imperative that they violated? So Rabbi Nissim Gaon says, he actually articulates natural law. He says, a decent person understands on his own that you have to help people in need. And if you don't help people in need, it is no answer. Well, God didn't tell me. God did tell you in an indirect way, through the normal conscience and empathy that a human being has. And therefore, God holds you accountable not only for what we might call revealed morality through revelation, but for what you might call the natural reasoning processes that a decent human being comes to. That's actually a very startling idea in which morality has a source outside of the revelation, the explicit revelation of divine will. So just to swing back to your point, so you were trying to make the same point regarding incest, brother, sister, mother, daughter. But I'm not so sure, because unlike maybe charity, cruelty, which may be instinctual, it may not be so obvious that there's an intrinsic evil involved in these relationships that goes beyond the revealed law. So I am just not sure if the natural repugnance would automatically be there. But I see that it might be. It may be a plausible argument. But okay. But your point about morality beyond the revealed law is indeed well taken and supported by Rabbi Nissim Gaon. Okay. So this now, of course, one might bring a simpler proof. One might talk about this. Everyone admits, this is in the Talmud itself, that there's a concept called lifnim mishurat hadin. You go beyond the letter of the law. Well, let's think about that. If morality is exhausted by the law, then there should be no spiritual benefit of going beyond the letter. In other words, Going beyond the letter of the law implies there is something beyond the law that is aspirational. Is that itself a proof to Rav Lichtenstein's thesis and Rav Nissim Gaon that there's an antecedent morality over and above the law? I mean, lifnim mishurat. In other words, and that becomes part of the law. Part of the law is to go beyond the law. But the Chazon Ish suggests that maybe not. The Chazon Ish suggests that lifnim mishurat adin has to be an extrapolation from a halachic value. In other words, halacha requires certain behavior, which is indicative of a certain value. So lifnim mishurat adin is to take that value and do more than the halacha requires. But it's grounded in the values of express revelation as opposed to some independent standard. So it's not, it's a very subtle distinction. But the Chazon Ish says, not like Reb Lichtenstein, the Chazon Ish took the position that there is no morality outside of the halachic structure, but the halachic structure itself can identify values in which you then go beyond the halachic measure, but you're still basing it on the halachic values. You're not bringing some independent judgment. This is actually a very fascinating. I mean, I don't want to spend the whole class on this. One can spend a lot of sessions on this. If you look at the what's Rav Lichtenstein Yeshiva, the Gush, what was it? Yeah, Gush Etzion, yeah, or Har Etzion. You look at the Har Etzion website, Google natural morality, and you'll see like 3 or 4 shiurim on this topic. Rav Kook was a great proponent of natural morality, and in one of Rav Kook's revolutionary statements, he actually talked about the fact that sometimes one of the downsides, maybe I shouldn't say this, but he says one of the downsides of intensive technical halachic analysis is that the feeling of natural morality within a person can become covered up because you're so focused on details that you miss a larger picture. I mean, let me give you a concrete example. And I get these shilos all the time. Um, you want to cheat. I'll use the word cheat. They don't describe it as cheating. You want to do something in which you evade taxes or you get a government benefit by a false statement. So often, a person who is shakua in Talmudic analysis will start analyzing all of the technicalities about stealing from a guy, and there's a difference in stealing from a guy and not paying a guy. There's a difference between taking and not giving, and they'll go through all of the different opinions and go through this subtlety and that subtlety. But at the end of the day, you're lying. You're cheating. Is that what a Jew does? Is that what a refined person does? Is that what a good person does? But a person gets involved in the technicalities of something and they forget the larger picture. So Rav Kook made a point that, of course, it's important to learn Torah and it's important to go into technicalities, for sure. But you have to be very, very careful that it doesn't take away the natural morality that comes from a person's conscience, a sense that things are wrong. And of course, pragmatically speaking, there's actually a medrash, Tana Dev Eliyahu, a medrash that says, he who cheats the non-Jew will ultimately cheat the Jew. He who kills the non-Jew will ultimately kill the Jew. Because morality is not divisible in that way. You get into the habit of lying, cheating. Don't think you're only going to limit it to a given category of people. It's going to spread. See, so that's a separate issue. That's a separate issue. But if Cook was making a broader point, actually, he was saying that, yeah, he was. Are we off again? Okay. Yeah. Okay. I don't know what to do. Okay. Anyone knows how to fix it? I don't see any switch. That's the thing. I didn't. Yeah. Sorry.
What was Rakok saying?
Yeah. Well, when I get back online, I'll.
wiggle room.
Yeah.
But what about father-daughter? Is there any possible way to avoid repugnance at such an act?
Well, I don't want to get arrested for promoting incest. I mean, I am certainly not an advocate of improper relations. But once again, I mean, if one were to be, totally objective and writing on a tabula rasa, writing on an empty slate, one wouldn't automatically, other than children. I'm not talking about child abuse, but I mean, if adults want to consensually have a union, I'm not sure if we would describe that as inherently evil and immoral, apart from the halachic structure. Now, I know that sociologists will talk about the imbalance of power. Okay, I realize all of that. Um, all I'm saying is, I guess the question that you're posing is incest an inherent evil, or is incest an evil uh, because of God's law? That's going to be the question, really. And I understand that one could debate it. I mean, bottom line, of course, is it is God's law, so of course it's evil, but it may be evil because it's God's law, not because there's some inherent evil to it. Okay, but we can leave that question. How did I get onto this? I was talking about Ger, but Gershon is Ger. Okay, so now what I want to talk about a little bit is I want to talk about the field of assisted reproduction. We know that Baruch Hashem, over the past half century, and continues apace, there have been major methods that have been developed to help people have children who are not able to have children in the normal way of marital relations. And this is called assisted reproduction. And often they, in this field of medicine, many Rashi Tevot are used. So it's often called ART. ART is assisted reproductive technologies. ART is a Rashi Teva that is used, and this would include, well, the oldest is artificial insemination, which was actually started with animals. Then we move to IVF, in vitro fertilization, and then we move to surrogacy and egg donation, which involve third parties. And then within each of these techniques, there's a lot of different modifications. So, for example, in a standard in vitro fertilization, they now have a way, which was pioneered in Israel, where they can actually do a drilling. They can drill into the egg so a sperm can penetrate the egg. Sometimes the sperm is not strong enough to break through the egg. So that's zoning, or whatever it is called. So Baruch Hashem, there are many different technical and scientific advances in this area that give people a lot of hope who formerly would not have been able to have children. So I'm sorry, what does ART stand for? Assisted reproductive technology. So the very first question is, does the mitzvah of Urevu obligate people to utilize assisted reproduction? Now, assisted reproduction can often be very difficult, particularly on the woman. I mean, let's even take a regular in vitro fertilization procedure. We'll talk about it in more detail, but essentially, a lot of hormones have to be administered in order to induce multiple ovulations, and that has side effects, sometimes very dramatic side effects. And then there is surgery for egg extraction, and then there is surgery for egg implantation. So it can be quite a toll on a woman. And for both men and women, there's emotional roller coasters, ups and downs. So here's the question. The Torah requires, there's a mitzvah called Urevu, but do we have to do surgery for that? Meaning, say, what is the Torah requiring? So Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach has an interesting psak. He actually says that the Torah's obligation of Urevu is only kederech kol haaretz. A husband and a wife have marital relations, and they try to have children. If that doesn't work, then God it's not their fault. I mean, Hashem decided that this wasn't work, but there's no chiyuv to have surgery. There is no chiyuv to go beyond derech kol haaretz. So a couple should not feel that they must go through fertility regimens. So that's an interesting thing to know. So if at some point they stop because it's too much, they're allowed to stop because it's too much. But as anyone, if you have either you're familiar with this yourself or you know people, most Orthodox couples very much want to have children. So even if the halacha says they don't have to pursue something, they'll want to pursue it anyway. And it involves also a lot of money. In Israel, it's a little better. Israel is, Baruch Hashem, pro-children. In the United States, I think the maximum that insurance will cover is 2 in vitro. I mean, it depends on your insurance, but the standard medical insurance only covers 2 in vitro attempts. Very often people need more to get a successful pregnancy. So at that point, it's going to be your own money, etc. Okay. So I'm going to therefore proceed with discussing these technologies because although halacha does not require that they be done, but very often a couple will want to do them. And there are wonderful organizations, A Time, Bonei Olam, that really help people in all of these different ways. Yeah.
Is there a question of this sometimes that whether the father, and not to use the father, but I mean halachically, would be the father, it's the son of Cohen, if the father, I mean, are there...
Yeah. So yeah, we're going to discuss. This is what we're going to talk about. Okay. So I'm going to start with the earliest assistance to reproduction that goes back well over 100 years, maybe 200 years. And this actually started off with animal husbandry, breeding animals. And then it got used for human beings. And then human beings. And this is artificial insemination. That simply means the sperm of a person, we'll talk about which person, is injected into the woman's body. It's not in vitro. Fertilization occurs within the woman's body, but it's through an injection of sperm in a syringe. Now, artificial insemination has 2 types. There is artificial insemination of husband's sperm, which again goes by the abbreviation AIH, like the military, everything's an abbreviation. Artificial insemination husbands. And then there is the bit more controversial aspect of AID, artificial insemination with donor. So let's take both aspects here. Let's first take AIH, artificial insemination with husband's sperm. Now, you may ask an obvious common sense question. Hey, what is the benefit of injecting her with husband's sperm? I mean, if the marital intimacy has not produced a pregnancy, then why is this going to be better? Well, the answer is sometimes it's still better because sometimes if, for example, and again, forgive me for being explicit, but we're discussing Torah topics, so we're allowed to be explicit. If, for example, there is a low sperm count, so with artificial insemination of husband, you can accumulate several ejaculates, drain away some of the surplus fluid, and you can have a more intense sperm count. And number 2, it's also a question of motility. Motility is like the speed, needs a certain speed, and the syringe can give it a faster push than intercourse. So AIH is still used to this very day, although it's less common because of in vitro, but it's still done. So what is the halachic problem with AIH? Are there any halachic problems with AIH? So first of all, I think someone asked me a question literally after last week's class. Is a person makayem Urevu through AIH? Meaning, if a person's sperm was not ejaculated through tashmish hamita, but through something like that, or IVF, or all of those things, whether it's IVF or AIH, right? It's all the same here. Are you makayem? Are you, meaning is a man makayem Urevu? So the emes is, all the poskim say yes, there is vadai, a fulfillment of Urevu, whether the sperm is injected in her body through AID, or AIH, or whether it's an in vitro fertilization, there is a fulfillment of Urevu. In fact, even though this technology was not available in the time of the Talmud does discuss an analogous situation that goes by the term nisabra ba'ambati. Nisabra ba'ambati, the woman got pregnant in a bathhouse. What's going on? Bathhouses were used by men and women, not at the same time, but men and women. And sometimes there may be a sperm and ejaculate in the warm water, and warm water actually keeps the sperm alive. And then a woman goes into the same water and she gets pregnant from that. Right? So really it's kind of a primitive in vitro fertilization, or AIH, or whatever you want to call it. Not AIH, but she got pregnant, from the zera. And the poskim all say Nisabra Biambati is a fulfillment of Pru Urevu. Huh? No, so in that case you don't know. You don't know, but I'm saying it's by analogy though, if you have a husband. Now so that's always a question. That is always a question. Again, not every case in the Gemara actually happened, and the Gemara is not claiming it actually happened. I mean, the Gemara discusses many theoretical questions to illustrate halacha, but Tosfos brings, I think, from the Talmud Yerushalmi, that this is the mysterious story of Ben Sira. Right? In the Apocrypha are those books that are not part of our Tanakh. For example, the books of the Maccabim. Right? They're not sacred. No, Yom is not, for sure. Yeah, for sure. But one of the books of the Apocrypha is Sefer Ben Sira. The book of Ben Sira. Now, Chazal actually quoted. This is the only book of the Apocrypha that Chazal actually quotes. So they actually read it and they used it. They never quote the book of the Maccabees. Now, the book of Ben Sira, if you simply look at it, is actually very similar to the book of Mishlei, the book of Proverbs. It's aphorisms about Musar and living a good life. It's like a Musar book. So, in many ways, it's very interesting. Mishlei, written by Shlomo HaMelech, is in the Kisvei HaKodesh, is in Tanakh. Ben Sira, which is Kemat, a very similar content, was not considered to be an inspired book, but it is a book of wisdom, meaning Chazal do quote it, do use it, but it's not it's like Mesilas Yesharim. We have many good Musar books that are not in Tanakh. Now, Tosfos brings a Yerushalmi that actually says the word Sira is Aramaic for a basin or sometimes a bathtub. So he says that the story goes Ben Sira was the product of Nisabra Ba'ambatia, and the father was none other than Yirmiyahu Hanavi. Yirmiyahu Hanavi was in a bathhouse. There was Zera left, and a woman used it, got pregnant. The kid that was born was known as Ben Sira, the son of the bathhouse, or the son of the basin. And the reason why he was Zocha to Chachma was because he was the son of Yirmiyahu Hanavi, but he was not Zocha to Nevuah because of the unusual, non-standard way that he was born. Now, again, is this historically true? Even that we don't really know, but there is at least a medrash that claims that Ben Sira was born from the equivalent of artificial insemination. Yeah.
So I was in Rome in the summer, and they have like these big, huge bathhouses of Diocletian. So you only have like one person using a huge bathhouse? Like, how does that work?
No, I would assume that many people used it, but again, in the Jewish bathhouses, men and women were not bathing together.
For sure not, but
Yeah.
only one man like was able to have like.
Oh. So the question is, how did you know? Okay, I don't have no. For sure, more than one person use it. But how do you know? How do you identify who the sperm donor is? That I have no idea. I really have no idea how that was done. Now, of course, Yirmiyahu was a Navi. Yirmiyahu may have known after the fact that this is my son, etc. But yeah, you're right. You wouldn't be able to identify. Certainly, more than one person used it. By the way, they still have these Turkish baths. They have in Yerushalayim, in New York. The old Russian Turkish baths, whatever it is. They hit you with a bush afterwards. It's a whole ceremony. That's how to do it. Yeah.
Perhaps this could be unfortunately an opening for somebody who's that had an improper relationship and she's the product of a bad. This is an opening now for anybody who did.
Well, yeah. Again, since it's not so well, okay. We'll come to that. It is a good point. Okay, all right. So our first point is this. Therefore, the first point is a simple point. AIH is a fulfillment of Urevu. It is his child, husband's husband. It's the husband's child. He is Mekayem Urevu. So, what are the halachic issues with AIH? So there are two halachic issues. The major halachic issue, and again, I apologize for being explicit, but in Divrei Torah, where it's proper to be so, is how is the sperm procured? Because that is a serious problem. We do know that there is a prohibition called hashchasat zera levatala, the emission of sperm for destruction. That would be masturbation and the like. We know this from the Chumash itself, that at least the rabbinic interpretation of the Chumash. The Chumash is a little ambiguous about the story of Er and Onan. Remember Yehuda? We're going to read it in a few weeks. Yehuda had a daughter-in-law, Tamar, who married his oldest son, Er. And it says, Er did evil in the eyes of God, and God killed him. So then she was married. Tamar was married by his other son, like a Yibum, who was Onan. And the Torah does say Onan spilled seed. He didn't want to make her pregnant because he thought it wouldn't be his child. It would be spiritually the child of Er. So he ejaculated outside of her body. That is called the emission of Zera Levatala. And he died as well. And then you recall the rest of the story, that Yehuda did not want her to marry his third son, Shelah. So Tamar dressed up as a prostitute, enticed Yehuda, got pregnant from Yehuda. And as sordid as that may sound, they are the ancestors of David HaMelech and Mashiach and the like. Okay, maybe we'll talk another time about that particular story. But I'm just bringing the story in right now to show the great Avera of Hotzaat Zera Levatala. Now, in order to have an artificial insemination, generally speaking, there would have to be some type of masturbation involved. Is that going to be permitted? So again, if anyone has any practical Lamaisa Shilas, you need to talk to a Rav individually about it. But the basic idea of the poskim is that since the emission of the zera is for purposes of procreation, it is for the purpose of having children, then even though it is not through marital intercourse, it would not be levatala because it has a toelet. It has the positive purpose of trying to facilitate pruervu. Again, not so pashut. Some rabbis will only allow it if they have tried to have children for at least 5 years, and some will require that they try to have children for at least 10 years before they would permit it. So do not take anything I'm saying as a practical psak you should implement, but ultimately this would be permitted because this is not levatala. Now, the second aspect is interesting, and that is, how does artificial insemination intersect? Okay, I can't. Okay. Maybe this is a sign I shouldn't be talking about this. I don't know. Thank you. Thank you. The second aspect is very interesting, and that is the intersection between artificial insemination and Hilchos Niddah. Let me explain this. Everyone knows a woman has a relatively narrow window in which she can become pregnant normally within the month. And it's a certain, like whatever it is, a few hours, let's say 12, I don't have the exact numbers, but a certain time before ovulation and a certain number of hours after ovulation. After that, before and after those periods, uh, normally a woman will not become pregnant, right? There's a fertile window. Now, one of the problems that Orthodox couples sometimes have is a problem of early ovulation. We know that when a woman becomes a niddah, based on our standard practice, there will be 12 days in which husband and wife are not allowed to be together, a minimum of 12 days. And sometimes, depending on hefsek TORAH and bedika, it might be 14, 15 days, or even longer. Now, let's imagine a woman ovulates the 10th or 11th day after her period, but she won't go to the mikveh till a day later, or 2 days later, or 3 days later. Now, that is actually a fertility problem for an Orthodox person, because by the time husband and wife can be together, she's already beyond the fertile period, or the fertile period is really towards its very end. So, again, this is a very delicate thing. You have to talk to a rabbi. Sometimes a rav will give a psak that a hefsek TORAH, could be done after 4 days, maybe even after 3 days. In other words, you make the mikveh earlier, but there's possibly another solution, and that is, what about artificial insemination of husband's sperm before the woman has gone to the mikveh? Because remember, the Torah prohibits intercourse. Injection of the sperm is not tashmish. So many poskim actually say that one of the solutions to early ovulation, which could create a fertility problem, is to use artificial insemination of husband's sperm as a solution to early ovulation. Meaning, yeah, even if it's day 10 or day 11 from her period, so she can't go to the mikveh, husband cannot have relations with her for sure, but AIH might work. Now, people then raise a spiritual problem, which is an interesting spiritual problem, which is very nogea the Bali Tshuva world. Baruch Hashem, we have to be very grateful that even though normally children that are born from adultery, children that are born from incest, have the stigma of mamzer. They can't marry most Jews. Well, based on normal halachic logic, a child who is born from a niddah should be a mamzer, logically. Now, if you think about that, that would be absolutely catastrophic. So Baruch Hashem, of course, saw all of this in advance. The rule is a child that is born from a woman who had intercourse when she was a niddah is not a mamzer. Okay, so a ben or bat niddah has no halachic disability. Okay, that's the good news. That if a person becomes a Baal Tshuva and his mother had not gone to the mikveh, he's perfectly fine, she's perfectly fine. They can marry anybody. That's the good news. The bad news is that the Talmud does say that even though a child born from a woman who conceived when she was a niddah, didn't go to the mikveh, is halachically permitted, it is a pagum. There is some spiritual blemish in the neshama that one should try to avoid. Again, it's not a halacha, but it's kind of advice. So that does raise the very, very interesting problem, which is a real problem. You have a daughter, and the shidduch that's proposed to your daughter is a fine, wonderful ben Torah, a big Talmid Chacham, a big tzaddik, who happens to be a Baal Tshuva, whose mother didn't go to the mikveh. Or the other way around, same thing. Your son is proposed to go out with a very, very fine girl, Yiras Shamayim, Sadekes, whose mother didn't go to the mikveh. Now, again, let me repeat. Is there a halachic problem in the shidduch? Absolutely not. There is absolutely no halachic problem. This is not a matter of halacha, for sure. But the question is it something that you avoid because of the pagam of ben niddah that might affect children, etc.? So this is a very agonizing problem, because if that would be the case, that would mean that Balei Tshuva would not really be able to marry other than other Balei Tshuva who have the same situation. So here we have two tshuvos. We have a tshuva from the Stipler, Rav Chaim Kanevsky's father. When I was growing up, Rav Chaim Kanevsky was known as the son of the Stipler. And now people know the Stipler as the son of Rav Chaim Kanevsky. But the Stipler was a great Gaon in Tzaddik. He was the brother-in-law of the Chazon Ish. He married the Chazon Ish's sister. As you know, the Chazon Ish had no children. So as a result, he became the second father. Rav Chaim Kanevsky essentially had two fathers. He had two Gedolim. The Stipler was his father, and the Chazon Ish was also his father. There was that type of closeness. So we have a tshuva from the Stipler, and we have a tshuva from Rav Moshe Feinstein. And both of them, let me give you the bottom line first, both of them take the position that one should not be reluctant. There should be no reluctance at all to have a shidduch with a ben or bat niddah. The Stipler gives the most common sense approach. Moshe gives a little bit of a convoluted mahalach. The Stipler says that when Chazal say a shidduch is not advisable, they didn't forbid it. They said it's not advisable. They were making a generalization that somebody who's conceived because of sin may have bad midot, may have bad character flaws. But any individual can beat that system. So if you see a person with good midot and you see a person who has good character, then they are just the exception to the rule. So don't worry about presumptions that there are defects in character if you see there are no defects in character. Now, the discipler says this was a rule of thumb. This was just an approximation. This was a preliminary judgment, and any individual person can beat that through their own work and the like. So he says, don't worry about it. If the woman or the man is sanua, is righteous, is yirei shamayim, don't bother about the background. Rav Moshe didn't want to say that. I think as Rav Moshe said, well, listen, it does say a ben niddah should be avoided. So Rav Moshe makes a bit of a convoluted cheshbon, which only a person who knows all of the halachas could possibly say. He said, even women who didn't go to the mikvah, on a Torah level, are really not nidos. Because he went through the different opinions. Bathtubs might be mikvahs, and showers might be mikvahs, and swimming pools might be mikvahs. And even if you're wearing a bathing suit, it's not a chatzitza. He says, whether it's accidentally or not, he says, it's very rare that you're going to have a woman that is absolutely a niddah under Torah law, and therefore you don't have to assume a ben niddah because of swimming pools and the like. In the olden days, people might take a bath once a year. So if you wasn't going to the mikveh, that could exist. Today, Rav Moshe goes through all of the different opinions. By the way, it's reminiscent of another story. Rav Moshe was a Rav before he came to America in the 20s and 30s. He was a Rav in Russia, Stalinist Russia. And obviously, it was a very dangerous place. And he needed to construct a mikveh, which was against communist law. So he arranged to bribe. They were constructing a communal swimming pool. And he determined a way to make the swimming pool a kosher mikveh. And that itself put him in danger because he had to raise a lot of money to bribe different officials. But he actually constructed a swimming pool to be a mikveh. But Rav Moshe's point is even more dramatic. Even a swimming pool that's not a mikveh, on some level of Torah law, might be a valid mikveh. Okay, so these are the two halachic issues with AIH. Number one, sperm procurement. And number two, the intersection. Oh, yeah, so let me just say, so that's the question. So I mentioned that AIH could be used before the woman goes to the mikveh. So the question would be, would that create the pagam of Ben Niddah? So many say no, because whatever pagam exists is only if it is a sinful relationship. Since this is not a sin, because there's no intercourse, so the discussion of the pagam of a Ben Niddah is not going to be relevant because there's no Maisa Avera. Yeah.
One of the things that posting sometimes tell women, if they're concerned about this, is to go to the mikveh after 7 days so that they're not needed the oraita.
Yep.
And they have a better feeling that the oraita, the child is not conceived as a nida.
Yep.
And it seems, it alleviates, their emotional.
Yep. That's correct. That is a very good point. Yeah. It's a little. I had that point in my mind. I thought it was a little too complicated to explain. Here is the thing. Again, what's our problem? Our problem is that a woman ovulates, let's say 10 or 11 days after her period. She can't go to the mikveh. And by the time she goes to the mikveh, she can't become pregnant. So what do you do? So I had mentioned AIH is a solution, but then you have the problem, the theoretical problem, that she's conceiving while she's a nida. So what I said was, don't worry about it. There's no Maisa Avera, so it's okay. But there is another mahalech, and that is the following. A nida min ha-TORAH is actually allowed to go to the mikveh after 7 days from her period, even if she's still bleeding. The requirement of the 5 and the 7 is a rabbinic. So some have suggested that she go to the mikveh after 7 days, then have the AIH after she went to the mikveh, and then she would go to the mikveh again after 12 or 13 days, and there would be no intercourse till then. In other words, a double tevilah, the first one without a bracha, and the second one with a bracha. And what are you gaining with that? The first tevilah at least takes off the status of nida d'oraisa. So you're 100% correct. There are poskim who say that's best. Other poskim don't like that because they say the temptation to have marital intercourse is much too strong if you allow a woman to go to the mikveh early. So they would actually prefer that she doesn't. But you are correct. This is one of the things a posek will discuss, is whether she should go to the mikveh early. Early doesn't mean unlimited early, but after 7 days from the start of her period, because that takes off the din of nida d'oraisa. Okay, so that's really all I have to say about AIH. Next week, we'll talk about AID, which is, as you could guess, a much, much, much more controversial procedure, and then we'll move to IVF. So we're going to try to go through the halachic issues in these technologies. Yeah.